As I was getting ready to publish this course, a new version of Photoshop came out with a few additions and improvements. One of the improvements they made is to the way that the gradient tool operates. The tool remains more or less the same, except that now it's a little bit more flexible and easier to work with. So in this video, I am going to give you 3 examples on how you may use it. And in the first example, I will show you the new tool, and in the other 2 examples, I will be working with the old tool. So for example, let's say that we wanted to darken the sky in this image. To do this, we could go to Adjustments and then create Curves Adjustment Layer and then darken the whole image like this. Now, to confine this adjustment to the sky only, we can create a mask, but we can also make the mask graduated so that it gradually changes from black to white. So if we use the gradient tool, and with this version of the tool, we should go to presets and use this preset, which is the black and white preset. Then we can click, make sure that you have the mask selected. You click, hold, and then you drag up like this. You can hold the Shift key to constrain the angle of the tool to make sure that the line is straight like this. And then you release, and then we end up with a gradient like this. So now our curves adjustment layer is applied to the top of the image only, and the mask is graduated. So what the new version of the tool allows us to do is to change this gradient, to tweak it after the fact, after we drew it. So we can grab one of these handles like this, and then we can move it up and down like this. And again, if I option click, you can grab the middle point, and then you can change the midpoint of the gradient like this. And then you can change the bottom point, etc. With the old tool, this was not possible. So if you wanted to change the gradient, you had to draw it all over again. So this makes the tool much more flexible. You can also, with the new version of the tool, you can reverse the gradient, and you have several different methods that you can try. They work in a slightly different way, so you may find that one of the methods may work better for certain images than the others. I think that the perceptual will work fine most of the time. Okay, so if I option click again, now if we look at our adjustment, and if we click on to the preview icon like this, you can see that we have darkened the sky, but we have also darkened some of the factory buildings in the foreground. So if we wanted to limit only to the upper part of the image, or actually in this instance only to the lighter tones of the image and not the shadows, what we can do is we can use the blend if. So if you double click on the layer, here for the current layer, where it says blend if, current layer, we have these sliders. So if we move the slider, can you see that now if we move it all the way like this, what we are saying to Photoshop is that the adjustment layer, this adjustment, should only be applied to these tones, so that the shadows, the dark tones, should be excluded from this adjustment. So we can actually limit the adjustment only to certain parts of the image. However, there could be a slight problem with this. If we zoom in like this, and then look at these tones carefully, can you see the jaggedness of the mask? So the mask is not very smooth. So what we can do here is we can Option click onto this slider to split it in two, and then take one end and bring it all the way to the left like this, and then move the other one like this. So basically what we are doing is we are creating a gradient so that this transition from no adjustment being applied and to the adjustment being applied fully is also graduated. So it doesn't kick in straight away, so it kind of tapers in and out like this. So this is the before and after. If we click OK and zoom out, now you can see that the adjustment is being applied mostly to the sky, although the building is still affected a little bit, but this is much better. So now you could go back and tweak this. Maybe we can change this a little bit more. We can take this point and bring it up a bit like this until we are happy with the result. So this is the before and after. So before and after. What you will also notice is that, for example, this silo and these chimneys are still being affected by the curves adjustment because of the outline of the factory against the sky. So it's not actually very easy to make a mask that will fit this scene perfectly. So what we can do then is we can click on the mask, use the brush tool, and then make sure that we are painting with black, because black is going to hide things. So, for example, if I zoom in, I can take a small brush, so this brush will work well for this image. And then to do this, you would probably want to zoom in, right in, and do this extremely carefully, but I'm going to give you a quick example of what you can do. So this way, I can actually adjust this mask, I can tweak it further. So I use the gradient to graduate the transition from top to bottom. Then I clicked on the blend if to blend it more, and now I'm using the brush to blend this even further. So I think if I do something like this, the mask should be quite dark in this area, so I don't think that this will be visible. So I'm just doing this freehand like this. And remember, if we option click now, we can go back and then just correct the mask and fill in any gaps that we may have left. Like this, and then once we have the mask, we can actually go back to this, to the curves, and then tweak them. So sometimes you may want to darken the sky only a tiny bit, like this. Now, another difference to the way that the gradient tool works is if you wanted to draw something. So let me give you an example. If I use the marquee tool, and let's say that I wanted to add some text on top of this, and I wanted to make like a label or a circle on top, like this. Then what I can do, for example, if I use if I set the foreground color to something like this, and then the background color to something like this, and then I want to paint something. So I'm going to create a new layer, Command-Shift-N, like this. And then if I want to use the gradient tool, what I have to make sure is to change the preset from black and white to foreground and background colors that I just selected. So now when I want to draw something, I get this, and then I can tweak it like we just saw earlier, like this. So I wanted to flag this up because In the third example, we are going to work on the knob of a guitar pedal, and we will want to draw something similar to this. So remember that you may need to change the presets. When you work with masks, you want to use the white, black and white, white and black. And when you want to draw something like this, when you want to use the foreground and background color, then you use this preset. Okay, so let's have a look at the second example now. In one of the previous videos, when we were converting images to black and white, we were burning in the edges with the brush tool. So we would make an adjustment layer curves, and then we use the brush to manually paint in the vignette. Now let's have a look at another way of doing this. So again, I can go to Adjustments, Curves, and then just darken the edges, something like this. I'm going to set the foreground color to be black, and then with the gradient tool, I'm going to draw out from the middle outwards like this, because I want this to be brighter than the edges. So this effectively creates a vignette. So the middle part is masked and the edges are being darkened like this. Now let's say that we wanted to add to this gradient. If I use the gradient tool like this, I would simply overwrite the existing gradient if I tried to add to it in this way. However, if I go back, what we can do is if we now switch the foreground color to white and then change the blending mode of the gradient to lighten, and then I'm also going to change the mode back to the linear gradient again. Now I can add, if you look at the mask, I'm adding to this gradient like this. So now I am darkening a little bit more on top, and maybe I can, if I add a little bit here, so I can darken this area a bit more and this area a bit more. So I'm combining the linear and the radial gradient. And then I'm left with something like this. If this doesn't appear too smooth, you can go and feather the mask a little bit, like this. Option click. So this is the before and after. And then again, I can tweak my curves adjustment layer further if I need to, like this. Now let's have a look at another way that we can use the gradient tool. So in this example, I would like to fix this reflection on the knob of this guitar pedal. So first of all, let's create a new layer. So Command-Shift-N. We can call this gradient. Click OK. And then what I want to do is I want to create a mask because I only want to tweak the top bit. So I'm going to zoom in quite a bit like this and then use the polygonal lasso tool like this. And then I'm going to draw my selection. So I'm going to leave this yellowish bit unselected because that is the edge. So I'm just going to trace around like this. If you make a mistake when using the polygonal lasso tool, you can press the backspace to go back. So for example, backspace, 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 backspace. Like this. And then another thing I want to do, I want to exclude this indicator, the white indicator line of the potentiometer. So I would need to change my mode from normal to subtract like this. And then take this part out. Okay, so now that I have the selection, I can create a mask. So I'm going to make white my foreground color and then add a layer mask like this. And then what I can do is, now using the gradient tool, G, I'm going to pick two colors. So I'm going to click onto the foreground color and then select this as my foreground color. So I need to be on the background layer. So again, this will be my foreground color. So darkish gray, click OK. And then for the background color, I'm going to select this very dark gray, this black from the top, there, like this, and click OK again. So now with the gradient tool, I can click on the layer that I created previously, and then draw a gradient like this that would fit the petal that I'm using. I'm going to switch back to the normal mode like this. I think this could look fine. And then if I zoom in, another thing that I can do, because this looks a little bit too clean now compared to the rest of the image, I can introduce a little bit of noise. So I go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, like this. So maybe 1.5 pixels. I've already set this previously. Maybe we can reduce this 1.2, let's say. So add noise, Gaussian noise, and monochromatic Ticton. Click OK. And now this appears a little bit too sharp compared to the rest of the image, so we can blur the noise as well. So we go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and then blur this very slightly by 0.5 pixels and click OK. Now we can zoom out. To blend this with the original reflection, we can reduce the opacity to 95%. Like this, so you can barely see the reflection. And then we could also make an adjustment layer on top of this, curves, that is clipped. So Option click between these two layers so that this adjustment layer only affects the knob like this. And then we can play around until this color blends in with the rest of the image. Maybe like this. And then another thing that we can do would be to double click onto this layer and then add bevel and emboss. So click like this, and then we can click on use global light and set the direction of the light so it comes from the top left, like the light in this image. And then set the size to something small like this, like a couple of pixels. Like this, and then also add the inner glow like this. Like that, and then again, maybe we can adjust the opacity of this layer once again, so that the whole thing blends in a little bit more. Okay, so this is the before and after.